there is no end in sight to a particular war, and it threatens everybody that it could accelerate or get much worse. So I think when he said 24 hours, he was in the back of his mind saying we're going to work for between November 5th all the way to January 20th to have a deal ready. But I don't think it'll happen in the 24 hours. I think he will take a breather with regard to support. That's why both parties, Ukraine and Putin, are trying to take as much land as they can prior to the 20th in the negotiations, because those are chips on their side of the negotiating table. I don't think that the U.S. will be supporting Ukraine with weaponry a year from now. Trump will try and get this resolved long before that.
Donald Trump's been setting out his priorities for when he takes office in just over 2 weeks' time. In a wide-ranging news conference at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, the president-elect said that the US would take control of the Panama Canal and Greenland. His son, Donald Trump Jr., is currently visiting Greenland, which is a Danish territory. Denmark's Prime Minister has said Greenland belongs to the Greenlanders and that only the local people could determine its future. The incoming president was asked if he'd rule out military force to back up his claims.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you. Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world. You look at, you don't even need binoculars. You look outside, you have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen. We're not letting it happen. And if Denmark wants to get to a conclusion, but nobody knows if they even have any right, title, or interest. The people are going to probably vote for independence or to come into the United States. But if they did do that, then I would tariff Denmark at a very high level.
Have you asked your staff to draw up plans for the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada said, under no circumstances will it ever be the 51st
Then
state?
maybe he won't win, but maybe he will. You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this. We need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China. And we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China. And they've abused it. They've abused that gift. It should have never been made, by the way. Giving the Panama Canal is why Jimmy Carter lost the election, in my opinion, more so maybe than the hostages. The hostages were a big deal. But if you remember, and nobody wants to talk about the Panama Canal now because, you know, it's inappropriate, I guess, but because it's a bad part of the Carter legacy. But he was a good man. Look, he was a good man. I knew him a little bit, and he was a very fine person, but that was a big mistake. Giving the Panama Canal to Panama was a very big mistake. I was going to use that as a major talking point, but I never got to use it because all of a sudden I had expected again all over the world. The Panama Canal is a disgrace, what took place at the Panama Canal. Jimmy Carter gave it to them for $1, and they were supposed to treat us well. I thought it was a terrible thing to do. Was the fact that they are allowing prisoners to come into our country. We gave it away for $1. But the deal was that, you know, they have to treat us fairly. They don't treat us fairly. They charge more for our ships than they charge for ships of other countries. They charge more for our Navy than they charge for navies of other countries. They laugh at us because they think we're stupid, but we're not stupid anymore. So the Panama Canal is under discussion with them right now. They violated every aspect of the agreement, and they've morally violated it also. What immediately is, just leave it in place. No. To be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name. It was a very good news conference. I think they've come a long way. Meta, economic force. because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada.
By executive order, are you planning to do on executive order when it comes to immigration? And how much do you want Congress?
We don't need anything they have. We don't need their dairy products. We have more than they have. We don't need anything. So why are we losing $200 billion a year and more to protect Canada? And I said that to, as I called him, Governor Trudeau. I said, listen, what would happen if we didn't subsidize you, if we didn't, because we give them a lot of money. So we'll do this again. I just want to thank everybody very much. No, right. But why are we supporting a country, 200 billion plus a year? Our military is at their disposal. All of these other things, they should be a state. That's why I told Trudeau when he came down, I said, what would happen if we didn't do it?
Well, let's talk to Thomas Del Beccaro, former chair of the California Republican Party. Good evening to you, Thomas.
Hi, great to be on again. How are you? Happy New Year.
And a belated Happy New Year to you too. An awful lot covered in that news conference by the incoming president tonight. Let's just start on all this talk about Greenland. Donald Trump's son, Don Trump Jr., is apparently there at the moment. Both the Greenland's political leaders and those in Denmark, which Greenland is a part of Denmark, have rejected any idea that it's going to be part of the US. Do you think that the incoming president is really serious about getting control of Greenland and, for that matter, the Panama Canal?
Well, you're seeing a very stark difference, aren't you, between Joe Biden and President Trump. President Trump holds a short news conference and has the world talking about it. Joe Biden's nowhere to be found. The weakness of America under Biden is no more. And you can make the argument that Trump is a little too boastful or arrogant. You could say those things, but definitely there's a change at the helm. With regard to Greenland specifically, keep in mind that the NATO General Secretary in 2022 called for a presence in the region as a necessity to counter Chinese and Russian interests. So this isn't a new issue, the importance of Greenland, and perhaps what Trump is doing is staking a claim from which he'll negotiate. And if that means that the West has a greater presence there, that's not a bad thing. And keep in mind, if the world is interested in a more electrical energy environment for all, then the West has to come up with the lithium and other rare earth metals that are necessary for that, and Greenland could play a part in that.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound as though Greenland wants to play ball with this. It certainly doesn't want to be part of the United States.
Yeah, that could well be. And maybe this is a prelude to, okay, let's make a greater trade deal or whatever it is. But the United States, of course, has had a long interest in this. In the late 1800s, Andrew Johnson made an offer for $100 million for it, but it didn't go through. So it could be that they don't have that interest currently, or this could be a negotiation point where they get more for their rare earth minerals and the West is more involved, and that includes NATO.
And he talked there about Panama. He seemed to be very concerned that the Chinese now control the Panama Canal, which the late Jimmy Carter, and his full state funeral is being held later this week, did actually hand control of the Panama Canal back to Panama. Once again, those threats there, do you think this is all about Donald Trump trying to talk tough at this stage so that he can get a reduction in the tariffs that US shipping has to pay to get through the canal?
That's possible. There is a concern with, look, China has been increasing its presence with predatory lending around the world. Many of those involve ports. They do have an oversized capacity or influence on the Panama Canal, which they could exercise during some sort of worldwide crisis. And that's not a good thing for anybody in the world any more than the Houthis bombing or raiding ships in the Gulf. So the reality is that Trump raises a good point here. We can quibble about how he does it. Some hate it, some like it. But the reality is that China should not have the oversized influence it has around the globe because they're not doing it for good reasons. They don't do it to increase trade for and help poorer countries. They're enslaving them with debt. And so he makes this point. Do I think he's going to put an army in there? No, I don't. But this could be another stake in the ground where he says, this is where I stand. Now let's talk.
Yeah, one of our listeners, Spencer's got in touch to say, do we think Trump is serious about invading Canada? He should remember the last time America tried that in 1812 or so, the White House got burned down and the president ran away. He's been pretty disparaging about Canada, hasn't he? And even suggested that Canada should be a US state.
Yeah, that of all the interests, that to me is how shall I say the not the least serious, but the most tongue in cheek. Look, Canada is a sovereign country. It wouldn't mix well with the United States given the nature of its economy, but again, he is positioning an argument, and it's not going to happen. I will tell you that the Canadian politicians suggested that Washington, Oregon, and California should join Canada, which they actually have policies very much like Canada. So if we were really playing chess here or trying to reestablish a risk, the game of risk, I don't know how many in England play that game, that would make more sense.
Let me ask you also about this question of the war in Ukraine. There are certainly a lot of concerns here in the UK about what Donald Trump is going to do about Ukraine. He's talked about trying to negotiate a peace deal, within 24 hours in the past. Do you think that Donald Trump is going to continue to support Ukraine in the war with Russia?
You know, there are some places where foreign policy is incredibly hard and some places where they are easier. It's easier to defund Iran and have consequences of defunding them. The war in Ukraine is probably as difficult a question as facing any president in the last 50 years because Russia is and Putin is who they are. Ukraine was invaded, but there is no end in sight to a particular war, and it threatens everybody that it could accelerate or get much worse. So I think when he said 24 hours, he was in the back of his mind saying we're going to work for between November 5th all the way to January 20th to have a deal ready. But I don't think it'll happen in the 24 hours. I think he will take a breather with regard to support. That's why both parties, Ukraine and Putin, are trying to take as much land as they can prior to the 20th in the negotiations, because those are chips on their side of the negotiating table. I don't think that the U.S. will be supporting Ukraine with weaponry a year from now. Trump will try and get this resolved long before that.
It's interesting you say that. And he was also talking there about the role of NATO and how it was essential for NATO members to up their defence spending to 5% of GDP. Britain and many other NATO members are a very long way short of that. Do you see that as something of a warning from Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think he wants to push that number up. Look, for better or worse, the United States is now at 36 trillion in national debt and needs to get its house in order. The American politicians have done a hideous job of taking care of their own people. And because of that and the inflation related to it and the trouble, there is sentiment in America again that we saw maybe 130 years ago about why are we involving ourselves so much in Europe? And if inflation is at home here and problems are at home here, Americans are less willing to do things abroad. And so if Trump is saying we have to get our own house in order, and he is, and Europe needs to pay a greater share, I think it's being responsive to that potential and existing sentiment.
Let me ask you while we're speaking about what you think Donald Trump will make of Elon Musk's increasingly outspoken attacks on the British Prime Minister and other senior ministers, and the British government's response to the grooming gang scandal. I mean, it has become a huge row here in the UK. Elon Musk, who's going to be a part of the incoming Trump administration, making these very outspoken attacks on the Prime Minister and senior other ministers in a country which is, after all, a pretty close ally of the United States. Do you think that Donald Trump himself is happy to have Elon Musk, who's a very close ally, getting quite so drawn into these sorts of issues?
I was trying to think back about this dynamic, and I don't remember, certainly in the television age, a titan of business who does well in a particular area and owns a company that is related to public policy because of its effect on public policy, that being Twitter or X, and who is advising a president at the same time and then doing what you just described. This would be, let's say, during the 1970s, the oil crisis, if the owner of the biggest oil company, or Exxon, started publicly trying to tell countries how to conduct their foreign policy. So this is very unusual. And I guess the question you're asking is Elon Musk getting too big for his britches or too big for a comfort zone for Trump? He did ask people in partial response to this that are coming in the administration to stop their social media statements, but Elon Musk isn't actually going to be a cabinet member. He doesn't actually have an official government position. And so this is unfolding before our eyes, and it is uncomfortable, I'm sure, for the incoming president. And we'll have to see whether Elon Musk has grown too big for his britches and how long a leash Trump allows him to have, given that, as you're alluding to, it's not just about this particular issue, but how do you handle diplomacy between two very important allies?
So do you think there is some unease amongst those around Donald Trump and, in fact, the incoming president himself about this behavior by Elon Musk?
I think the unease could well be not so much with Trump, but with the diplomatic corps, because diplomacy is mass media is very bad for diplomacy. Sometimes it's important to talk to your friends or even your enemies behind the scenes without the glare of the media. And they'll want to conduct diplomacy behind closed doors at times. And we live in a different age, this mass media age, which is making that harder. And what you're pointing out is a very interesting dynamic. And we'll have to see how it plays. I'm sure the English government's going to say to the Trump government that, hey, can we shut some of this down so we can make progress? I'm sure that's going to happen.
It's fascinating stuff. Thomas, let me just ask you before we go. We're getting reports of some very serious wildfires in parts of California, even approaching Los Angeles. How serious do you gauge what is happening there?
I'm supposed to give a speech in that area in 2.5 weeks. And, the thing about California is we tend to build homes within very wooded areas, and we don't thin those areas out in California. And that's a super high risk. And because of this area you're talking about, where these winds the Santa Ana winds have been occurring for thousands of years, it's all the more dangerous. So it is a very serious issue in California because of the nature and the lay of the land, just like listen to me, Tornado Alley in the center of the United States. This has become a wildfire alley. So it is a very serious issue. And I have friends that are impacted by it.
Thomas Del Beccaro, former chair of the California Republican Party. Really good to talk to you tonight. Thank you so much.
All right, talk to you soon.